Hello, everyone. This is Jeff Foley with Paladin Financial, and thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Paladin Financial Talk. With me, as always, our lovely co-host, Mr. Tony Shore. And today, we're going to talk about a high-level overview of the new One Big Beautiful Bill Act. I love to say that very quickly. One Big Beautiful Bill Act that passed on July 4th. And today we're just going to give a high-level overview of that. And in the coming weeks, we're going to break down some of the key provisions in more detail that might be applicable to you as a listener. So the Act had very big news with this. There was over 900 pages in the Act, Tony, and 70 tax-related changes that came about from this. And it was actually the Senate version of the bill is the one that actually was passed, which differed quite a bit from the House version of the bill. But had it not passed, we would be at the end of this year, as we've been talking about over the last 4 years, we would be reverting back to 2017 tax law. So the Tax Cut and Jobs Act that was passed in 2017 changed a lot of things, and that was set to sunset at the end of this year. And this new act, I'll abbreviate it and call it the Act, extends a lot of those major provisions, most notably the tax brackets and higher standard deduction. But it's a major change in tax policy and represents additional complexity. You know, there's been a lot of talk over the last decade plus in particular about trying to simplify the tax bill. This did not accomplish any of that. It went the other direction and makes tax planning more complicated, and you got to be more proactive with some of the changes that kick in with this.
Well, yeah, I mean, the one part of the bill that I find really accurate in the title is big.
True.
I've heard it's closer to 970 pages. It's over 900 pages long.
Yeah.
So there are going to be good things in there and bad, and we still have to see how things play out, because a lot of times they end up clarifying, well, here's what this actually means when it comes to actually the application of a lot of the things in the bill. So I think it's good we're going over it. There are some significant changes.
There are, yeah. Even at 970 pages, if you think of all the changes that have come about as a result of it, it's probably not enough pages, as to your point, as there are going to be things that they haven't filled in the cracks yet on.
Right.
And we'll talk about a couple of those here today, but more so in the next few weeks when we fill in some of the details. But
sure.
Yeah, we're going to talk about some of the big provisions today. Most notably, a couple of the most notable ones, the standard deduction increased $750 for individuals and $1,500 for couples. That starts this year. That's another thing I want to point out in the next several weeks as we highlight some of the details of the Act. Some of these things change this year, next year, expire in 28, 29, 2030. Some are permanent. So you really have to dial in and understand which provision you're looking at and when the start date and end dates and phase outs and all those things kick in for this. So the standard deduction increase is a good one that's increased just a little bit, pretty straightforward with there. Another big one is the 2017 tax bracket changes were made permanent, and that prevents bracket hikes that we were going to see in 2026 with the expiration of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. So this is very good for long-term planning. Over the last several years, we've helped folks do a lot of Roth conversions to get the taxes out of the way now in a relatively low tax environment, because we don't know what's going to happen. And even though this bill makes that permanent with those brackets, permanent is not permanent, as we know.
Permanent in quotes,
Permanent in pencil.
Until the next administration.
Right. So if the hat changes from red to blue, who knows what might happen somewhere down the road. So we have what we have today. So that's important from a tax planning perspective. If you're listening to this, is don't assume all these things are going to continue on as is. Take advantage of what we have today.
Yeah.
Another one that was changed was the AMT exemption receives a boost with that. So higher income thresholds for AMT exemption have been maintained. For some people, that's a good tax saving opportunity. And one of the ones that has caused some confusion is there were no changes to Social Security taxation. One of the original goals of the bill was to repeal taxation of Social Security income. That didn't happen. We've had that a lot question from listeners and clients over the last few weeks. once this bill passed, but there was no change to that. Now, the temporary addition of the age 65 plus deduction that we'll talk about here in a moment What that does do is help to exempt some Social Security income from taxation by increasing the deduction amount that you're potentially able to take advantage of. But there was some confusion about all of this because the Social Security Administration, right after the bill passed, they sent out an email that in essence claimed the new law would result in nearly 90% of Social Security beneficiaries not owing anything on their benefits, which is, the old phrase, pardon me, but liars figure and figures lie, figures lie and liars figure. So that claim appears to be based on an analysis from the White House Council of Economic Advisors, where they did an estimate that under the law, about 88% of Social Security beneficiaries will have total deductions that get their income under where that Social Security benefits would be taxed. So the assumption in that analysis, though, is that all deductions first offset Social Security income rather than any of the taxpayers' other taxable income. But in reality, deductions are agnostic, if you will, to what that income is. So it's kind of misleading with that. So we'll spend more time on that in the next few weeks. Tying in, I mentioned the senior deduction. So there's a new enhanced senior deduction that applies for the next few years, starting this year. That's $6,000 per person. If you're married filing jointly, you each have $6,000 if you're 65 or older. And there are phase outs that we'll talk about, income phase outs. So that could help reduce the taxable amount of Social Security benefits for a lot of middle income retirees. I know in the last few weeks, we've had a number of client reviews with our clients that are age 65 over and have been looking at tax planning software. This has made a big difference for a lot of people. So this was a big win.
It's huge. Yeah. And in fact, I will jump in and say my personal favorite or personal opinion in the bill, the one thing that I do like, because it really does help the middle class, the tax burden, especially seniors, obviously seniors, and that is that bonus standard deduction of $6,000 per person on top of the already additional standard deduction for people over 65 and the now increased standard deduction. So I do love that, and that will put a lot of people who may have been paying taxes on Social Security, drop them below that amount.
Right.
I think the numbers, might not be 90%, but it'll be a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely helpful. Moving on to itemized deductions, the final version of the Act made a number of changes to a lot of different itemized deductions. In fact, the only one I could think of that didn't have any changes to it was the qualified medical and dental expenses that has a floor of 7.5% of your AGI. There was no changes to that. Otherwise, every other category of itemized deduction that you would see on Schedule A on your tax return, where you list all those out, has been changed in some way. Looking at families and workers, the child tax credit increased by a couple $100 starting in 2026. No tax on overtime hours up to certain limits. That was a big campaign promise.
It's huge.
Yeah. New Medicaid work requirements for some adults. So that's one of the things that some people are upset about is because of those work requirements, there are going to be people that lose their benefits if they're not working and are able to do so. So that's a consideration. Some other areas, deductions and credits, the SALT cap, which is state and local taxes. So the amount that you can list as a deduction on your tax return, particularly if you're in a high tax state. So Minnesota, I think we're number 9 in the country, but other places like...
We're top 10.
Yeah, hallelujah. But other states like California and New York, this was an even bigger deal.
Sure.
And this is also one of the key provisions in the act that almost stalled it completely in Congress, because if you're a senator, you're in the House in any of those high tax states, they really wanted to push that SALT cap up. So that was raised to $40,000 for many people starting this year, but it's temporary, and we'll talk about the timelines on that in an upcoming show.
Because it was going to expire. So it was set to expire in 2026, and so starting next year, there would be no cap. Mm-hmm. It would be unlimited, right. And so they kept a cap, but they raised it.
Yep, exactly. Charitable deductions for non-itemizers starting in 2026. So up until this point, if you did not itemize, that charitable deduction didn't do you any good. So there's a little bit of income you can deduct. We'll talk about the details on that in an upcoming show, but a little bit of relief there. Tip income is another thing that, again, subject to limits that we'll talk about, does take some tip income for people off the table. New car loan interest deductions, that has some income limitations as well. And that's also a temporary provision for the next few years.
But that's good. Those are good things.
Yeah. So it's new car purchases, has to be final assembly in the US. If you're looking at buying a new car, they can tell you wherever you're buying that from, whether or not that applies in your situation. And there are a lot of green energy tax credits that were also nixed and different deadlines throughout this year. But in short, after 2025, a lot of those go away. One of the ones that's gotten a lot of press, but frankly, I don't think is that big of a deal for most people, is the new Trump accounts for kids. If you've heard about these are tax advantage custodial accounts where the government, depending on if a newborn between 2025 and the end of 2028, the government will fund that account if you open it up with $1,000, and then parents can make contributions up to $5,000 a year up until the year before the child turns 18. But if you look at comparing that to other account funding options, there's not really a lot of benefit there other than the $1,000.
The $1,000 that the government's going to throw in there to get it started is good. But you're right. There are, a Roth IRA or a 529, there are already some pretty good options out there.
Yeah, but will be better for people that are lower income. That $1,000 makes a significant difference.
Sure.
Another big one, final one we'll talk about for today's overview is the estate tax exemption was made permanent. $15 million for single, $30 million for joint, for starting for next year, and that's indexed for inflation as well. So again, we'll walk into each of these a little bit more detail and how you can use these as a tax planning opportunity based on your particular situation if you're listening in, and delve into that in more details. But some next steps that you can think about is review your multi-year tax plan.
Yeah.
So between now, 2025, through when some of these provisions are set to expire, look at how you can take advantage of those year by year and be aware of that. So one of the things that we do for our clients in our tax planning process is help to identify opportunities like that, put it on the radar, and make sure those are taken care of. It also creates an opportunity to reevaluate Roth conversions, charitable giving, and other deductions that could have some tax saving opportunities for you in the short run, and as it relates to Roth conversions in the long run. And you also want to look at coordinating your plan between your financial advisor, CPA, or enrolled agent, or if you're doing your taxes yourself, put your tax hat on and evaluate those, and potentially, depending on your situation, your estate planning attorney as well. And understand as you prepare for your taxes what the expiration dates are for these different provisions that might be relevant to you. So the last thing I'd ask is make sure, again, tune in for the next few weeks as we dig into this in more detail and nerd out, as we like to say, on some of the provisions of the OBBBA, One Big Beautiful Bill Act. But yeah, we look forward to digging into that. And as always, reach out to us if you have questions that you want to make sure that we cover on the show. Feel free to reach out to us. You can email us at info@paladinfinancial.com. You can call us, go to our website, paladinfinancial.com, a number of ways you can reach out, or contact us through social media as well. And as you listen to the podcast, to help expose the podcast to other people, highly encourage you to take a moment to scroll down in your podcast app and give us an honest rating. We'd appreciate the feedback. We read all of those and would love to hear your thoughts on our show. So if you have any questions and want to give us a call, you can reach us at 651-842-8406. Again, 651-842-8406. Thank you again for tuning in to this week's episode of Paladin Financial Talk. Thank you, Tony, as always. And we look forward to digging in here in the next few weeks. Take care.
All right. Yeah. Thanks, Jeff. Great show today. And that does it for today's episode of Paladin Financial Talk.